Great. Well, we have quite a number of folks who have already joined us, so I think we will get started. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I am Nika Trufanova. I'm the Director of Development and External Relations at the Emerald Necklace Conservancy here in Boston. I'm delighted to welcome you live from the James Michael Curley House on Jamaica Way. And I'm seated here in Mayor Curley's library, and I brought him with us for the tour. It's a great day to be talking about a Boston mayor. I'm so excited to take you through the house on this virtual treat in a moment. Some of you who are joining us perhaps for the first time may be wondering why the Emerald Necklace Conservancy is offering this tour of this historic residence. The Emerald Necklace Conservancy, based here in Boston, works to restore and improve the 1,100-acre Emerald Necklace, a linear park system designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. We run volunteer programs to help maintain the park. We prune trees and restore the parkscape. We offer education programs for youth and adults and engage with our park users with a variety of free programs and events like this tour. You can learn more about us at www.emeraldnecklace.org. And as I say some things, our staff will be putting links in the chat so you can follow along and bookmark them for later. Early last year, 2020, the Conservancy began leasing this building from the City of Boston's George White Fund in order to expand our administrative offices and allow our Shattuck Visitor Center in the Back Bay Fence to better serve visitors, school programs, and community. We moved in last February, and we were so excited to welcome you in person in a series of tours to this house, and we all know what happened after that. So today, we bring you a virtual first peek into the Curley House, and while we can't be here together, the upside is that we can all come on this tour, and there is no fire code on Zoom, but there is at the Curley House. With us tonight are two wonderful tour guides, locals steeped in the history of the Curley House, and I'm so very pleased to introduce Carol Matheson, former assistant to the Chief of Public Property at the City of Boston, and John Bowman, former chair of the Boston Landmarks Commission. Carol and John are both members of Friends of the James Michael Curley House as well. It's a group of local friends of the house who work with us on interpretation and tour guides and information for the house. Thank you both for this wonderful tour and for joining us for the Q&A afterward. Also with us is Karen Monty Brodek, president of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, and all three of our wonderful panelists will stay on to take our questions after the tour. So save your questions or put them right in the Q&A. So a little bit of Zoom housekeeping, as is our custom, and a little bit of a disclaimer. Even though we've been doing this for over a year now, trying our hand at video production and live broadcasts, we're still primarily park stewards. So please bear with us in case of any technical hiccups. We're recording this webinar, and we hope to share it with those who couldn't make it. It'll be available on YouTube. And then at the bottom of your screen, if you're kind of new to the webinar format, you will see a few icons that allow you to interact with us during this event. If you have general comments or stories or links, you can put them in the chat. If you have specific questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A section, and we will be monitoring that on the back end and answering your questions at the end. We would also love to learn a little bit about you and where you're joining from and how you learned about the house and the event. So you will see a couple of poll questions pop up on your screen. So we thank you for taking a minute to answer those, and your replies will be anonymous. And I think it takes about 30 seconds. And once everyone has a chance to do them, we can move on. Thank you for putting that in.
Panelists can't vote.
So I know.
You know. But everyone else, thank you so much. It's always nice to know who's joining us from how far away, and so we can do more programs that people like.
Okay, and now we will jump into the program. The tour is pre-recorded. It runs about 28 minutes, and we'll make sure we have plenty of time for Q&A. I will ask now for Carol, John, and Karen to turn off your video and audio. So mute yourselves, turn off your videos. I will do myself last, and then we'll turn it back on at the end of the tour. And we will turn up the volume as far as it can go on our end. If you're having a difficult time hearing, try adjusting your own volume on your phone or computer or iPad, tablet. And you will hear some noise from the Jamaica Way. We're right here on the Jamaica Way. We did get traffic on the tour, so that should last about 3 minutes. And after that, it should be quieter. And again, if you're experiencing difficulty or lag time in the video, we also have this tour available on YouTube. So a link is being put into the chat. And there you have it. So you can always switch to YouTube, watch it there, come back after the video is done for Q&A. We did run through a lot of tests for this, believe me. We found nooks and crannies in Zoom settings we didn't know existed. It should work really well, but it's not perfect. If it's not perfect, forgive us. Thank you for your understanding. And now, without further ado, on to the tour.
Welcome to the Curley House. I'm Carol Matheson.
And I'm John Bowman. We're going to give you a tour and a little bit of history today. We walked in through the front door and we're now in the main hall of the James Michael Curley House on the Jamaica Way. The house was built in 1915 and it's about 7,500 square feet, and it has 7 bedrooms and 2 servant rooms and 3.5 baths. It's built in the Georgian Revival style. The architect was Joseph McGinnis, who was a young architect at the time. What you're looking at now are features of the house that were formerly in the estate of Mr. Rogers, Henry Rogers in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and it just so happened that that estate, the main 85-room house, was being demolished at the time that Mayor Curley wanted to build this house. So he bought a number of architectural features of that house, including the stairway that you're looking at now, the dining room that we'll look at a little bit later, and many mahogany doors, which you'll see as we go through the tour. On the left is the living room. The first floor of the house has the entry hall we just saw, this living room, the breakfast room, which was the main dining area for the family, and the dining room and the kitchen. Upstairs are the bedrooms now being used by the Emerald Necklace Conservancy as their offices. There were quite a few famous people that came here during the course of Curley's time as a politician. I understand from the family that Eleanor Roosevelt was hosted in this room, and also the actress Sophie Tucker and the entire Vienna Boys Choir at one point were in here. Beyond the breakfast room is the rear door to the house.
The rear door was typically known for where the constituents who came in to seek different favors from then Mayor, Alderman, Governor of the Commonwealth, Mr. Curley, and they would be escorted out that door generally. They would come in through the front as we had, and immediately into the library, so that they were kept away from the rest of the family in their private space. There's a lot of history as to who came in and out and why, and the various maids that would lead them in and rob Mr. Curley of his last nickels in those pockets. But it was quite a rich heritage. This room that we're in right here, the living room, has been transformed from what it would have been in James Michael Curley's days, because the Junior League of Boston in 1995 created a show house here, a decorated show house. And what you're seeing are some of the features that the individual decorators put into the house. This is sort of hand-screened silk wallpaper, very, very decorative and typical of what you might have found in an elegant home at the time that this was built. The decorative items in the room are really just examples of what you might have found in the house at the time. The fireplace is one example also of the Henry Rogers estate that had been purchased by the mayor prior to the construction of this house, and it was inserted in here. It's quite lovely.
I think it's important to remember Curley lived in this house for over 40 years, selling it in 1956 or 58, and to the Oblate Fathers, which was a missionary organization. They occupied it for over 30 years. And then with the proceeds from the George Robert White Fund, the city of Boston purchased the house in 1988 and designated it a Boston landmark. What was unusual about that designation is it also includes interior areas of the house, particularly this hallway area, the stairwell going all the way up, the dining room, which is ahead of us, and the library to the right. So these are all also a Boston landmark.
The significance of this, of all of these features really comes from the fact that the house in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, for the Rogers estate, were designed, or was originally designed by a very well-known Boston architect, Charles Brigham. And he's responsible for, was responsible for one of the buildings of the MFA in Boston, which has subsequently been torn down, but he's also was one of the significant architects of the Christian Science Center in Boston, and numerous houses and properties in the Back Bay and other parts of Boston and Watertown, and actually throughout New England. He had quite an illustrious career. So the significance of this, all of these artifacts really are because of his distinguished history as an architect in the city. So it goes beyond the mayor.
So this was also in the room that Curley would invite people over, particularly Broadway-bound shows. He would invite the cast back here. On one occasion, I think it was the opening of The King and I, he invited the composer Richard Rogers, that we know of from Rogers and Hammerstein, back, and Gertrude Curley, Curley's second wife, played for Rogers the melodies from the show that they had just attended. Rogers was amazed because he said, she had to play that from memory. We haven't published the sheet music yet. I thought that was fascinating. Another luminary from the time that Curley invited back here was the famous African-American dancer Bill Robinson, whose stage name was Bojangles. He was famous for appearing with Shirley Temple in 3 or 4 movies, one of which they did a famous dance called the Stair Dance, in which he tap danced up a stair. When Bill Rogers was invited back here, he recreated the famous stair dance on these stairs.
These stairs also served as a backdrop for the wedding portraits of his daughter Mary, who was here married in the house, and made quite a trail in down the stairs. It was quite beautiful. And here we have a little hidden gem. This is an indication of the upstairs, downstairs quality of a home of this nature. We have an entrance to the servants' quarters. So they came off of the main hall, and what you see going down would be stairs leading directly into the kitchen. On the top here, we have 2 bedrooms for the 2 maids that lived in the house and rotated over time. a small bathroom for their needs. So they were always accessible to the family, but yet screened from the family. So you can look at the difference really in the architecture between the two styles of living. Even Boston has an upstairs, downstairs in its history. This chandelier that you're looking at is actually kind of one of those interesting things. The first term that Mr. Curley was a representative to the U.S. House of Congress in the 1910, 1911, he was able to befriend someone at the Austrian embassy, and here we have a chandelier from the embassy, which marks the most dramatic point in this house. It's pretty significant. You can see the emblems of the seals of the Austrian government. It's all solid brass. It's quite beautiful.
So as we go upstairs now, we're on the bedroom level of the house. To the right would have been the master bedroom and master bath. Now being used as the administrative offices for the conservancy.
One interesting thing, we won't see it today, but in this master bathroom is a stand-up shower, which was one of supposedly the first of its kind in this region, if not country. Mr. Curley had spent some time in Europe at some point and discovered that they had these showers that you could walk into, and he wanted that installed in his own home here. So it was quite a feat at the time, and everyone was quite intrigued by it. As you look at these windows out along the Jamaica Way, you see the Jamaica Pond behind as a backdrop, and that's where you'll have enjoy the sunset every evening. And I think the architecture of the house just really shows that the way it was positioned was in its best light, so that you'll see sunset along this entire side of the house with all of the bedrooms fronting it. It's quite beautiful.
We didn't talk about the shamrock shutters that are on the
We
outside
should,
of the
on the
house.
outside of the house.
But this area of Boston, the Jamaica Way, I think was laid out in about 1890, but was predominantly large estates owned by Protestant Brahmins. And it was quite a statement of Mayor Curley to put these Irish shamrocks on his shutters in what had been a bastion of Protestant Brahmins.
They interpreted it as we believe he meant it, which was a little bit of thumbing in his nose, which is quite. You have to envision that when the mayor lived here and his family, from between his first wife and his second wife, there were quite a few children that ran into this house. We have stories, numerous stories that have come in over the years of people in their 80s and 90s who have run into the house and said, I played here as a child. I came over here and I played. I had one friend of mine, I knew her through an alumni association, and she came in here and she just squeezed her cheeks and she said, I slid down that banister when I was a child. So we focus on the architecture, the history of the house, we focus on the man. But there were children that lived in this house. There was a lot of joy and there was a lot of sadness. Many of these children predeceased the mayor himself, or James Michael Curley. But there was also a lot of fun and frivolity which happened. And this is something which is probably near and dear to every woman's heart. A real, honest to gosh, linen closet. Centrally located in the house. Of course, the maids could whip up and take out the linens and bring them off to the various bedrooms and bathrooms. And you know, these drawers would have come out, and I'm sure that they were filled with quite a few large tablecloths, sheets, linens, napkins, everything that you would imagine in a gracious home that entertained us to the extent that this house did and was known for. So we have extensions of bedrooms up in here, continuing into the house. This is one room now, which is transformed dramatically from what might have been the case when James Michael Curley was here. Clearly, the woodwork and the wallpaper is reminiscent of the decorated show house from 1995. They had a passion for showing what they could do and make things look quite different from what they might otherwise have been. But these would have been bedrooms for children at the time. We think that Richard Dennis and his brother had bedrooms here.
Richard Dennis was Mayor Curley's stepson when Mayor Curley married Gertrude Curley in about 1936. She had 2 sons. She was a widow, and they moved into the house. That was Curley's second family in the house. And Dick Dennis tells the story that Mayor Curley would have Jamaica Pond stocked with trout once a year in the spring, and he would get Dick Dennis up at 4 o'clock in the morning and have him row the mayor out to the center where he would catch the first trout. You can see the Jamaica Pond out the window here.
So what you're looking at here from the second floor, you see the beauty of it, is the stained glass window, which was made for the house by a very distinguished artist, Charles Connick, and it's signed in it. And what is so unique and wonderful about it is that it has the Irish cottage on it and the insignia, east-west, home is best, which is an Irish proverb that James Michael Curley, with all of his heritage, really felt very special. It was very important to him. And this window is again one of those interesting articles where, aside from the house and the history of people who lived in it, this is also an architectural statement that is of historic significance to Boston because of Mr. Connick's work, and it's been well maintained. It has a beautiful medallion in the center, which at some point will reflect right down into the middle of the foyer, and it's quite beautiful at 6 or 7 in the morning when the sun is at its peak in May or June.
On our left, we're walking into the most ornate room in the house, which is 30 feet deep by about 20 feet wide, 14-foot ceiling. It's the old dining room that came out of the Rogers House in Fairhaven. The mahogany carvings, the chandelier. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, the chandelier is a wonderful chandelier, which, again, I think that is not from the Rogers House, but it's rather reflects James Michael Curley's Irish heritage. It's also finished with sterling silver, which we believe the Oblate fathers, in their desire to maintain things more easily, have bronzed over. But this is a wonderful crystal chandelier. It was original to the house, and was probably refracted all sorts of light and happiness through the many meals and festivities. We've been told, we have pictures, that there was a Christmas tree right in the center of the window every year, where children and toys would look to see if Santa had arrived. The carving in this room is really just beautiful. And this room the house was built around the room, and it's quite a unique piece of construction. The fact that it could have all been taken out of one house and made into another in such completeness is quite a tribute to the architect who made certain, and the artisans who continue to install it.
Above the fireplace, you'll see something that ties the Emerald Necklace Conservancy straight to this Curley House. The original site plan that you're looking at here, here's the Jamaica Way, here's the front of the house, and here are the gardens in the back. This landscape plan was done by the firm of Olmsted Brothers, which was the firm of James Michael Olmsted, who designed the Emerald Necklace. Frederick Law Olmsted. So it's very fitting that the administrative offices of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy are on a property that was actually the site plan of which was done by the Olmsted Brothers.
It seems as though history has intervened to bring a lot of coincidences back to the house. The fact that it was acquired by the George Robert White Fund originally, who was known to, it was an employee of the city of Boston at one point, and when he passed away, he left a very large estate to the cities to use in their behalf, and it was James Michael Curley who used it for the establishment of all of the neighborhood health centers throughout the city. Fitting then that his fund was used to acquire the property in 1988, and now we have the coincidence again of the Olmsted firm plus the Emerald Necklace, whose mission is to maintain and preserve and enhance the beauty of the Emerald Necklace, built by or designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. So it's really nice the way the history has turned its way around.
So the last room, which is designated as a landmark, is Mayor Curley's library, which is on the first floor, on the front of the building, is accessible off of the main hall and also the entrance hall. Well, we have here photographs of Mayor Curley, family photographs of his two families here over the years. He had 9 children with his first wife, Mary, 7 of whom predeceased him. And then in 1930, Mary died in about 1930, and about 1936, he married Gertrude, and she was a widow with 2 children. Richard Dennis, who's seen here in the photographs with Mayor Curley, lived a very long and full life, and just passed away recently at the age of 95. Dick was instrumental in convincing the city to acquire the property from the Oblate Fathers back in the 80s, and was absolutely thrilled when the Emerald Necklace Conservancy was designated as to occupy the house. He sincerely wanted the house to be used and to be open to people.
He's been in the house numerous times and has told so many wonderful stories about the house, and we only wish we could have recorded all of his stories so that they could be here for perpetuity. But his love for the house and his love for his stepfather was very profound, and he really tried. I would say the last 20 years of his life were spent trying to figure out how this house could be maintained in such a way that the people of Boston could continue to enjoy it. And as Mr. Bowman says, he's thrilled that it's the Emerald Necklace who will maintain that mission.
So the library was the place where Mayor Curley would relax. He was not well schooled, but he was well educated. He was very widely read, and one of his proudest possessions was his library, which to a large extent has been sold and dismantled. He also kept a number of scrapbooks of his political career, and he donated those scrapbooks to Holy Cross, where they are available for inspection. Mayor Curley ran 33 campaigns, political campaigns. He had a political life that stretched 50 years. He started out as an alderman, became a city councilor, a state rep, the governor, and of course the mayor of Boston 4 times. He didn't always win. He ran for mayor 9 times, and so he was defeated 5 times, but he did serve 4 terms as mayor, 4 terms as a congressman from Massachusetts, and 1 term as the governor of Massachusetts. On his last day as governor, he got married, I think, to Gertrude, his wife, and they walked down the steps of the State House, and then they went on a honeymoon to Italy, where they had an audience with the Pope, I understand. But Dick Dennis's mother, Gertrude, said, well, you know, I was First Lady of the Commonwealth for almost 2 hours. What's, I think, fitting is that this house was purchased by the George Robert White Fund. The architect of this house was, as we said, Joseph McGinnis, a young architect. He died in 1918 in the Spanish flu pandemic. And shortly after he passed, his wife and young daughter passed as well. In 1922, George Robert White gave, as Carol has said, a substantial endowment to the city of Boston. Mayor Curley, having witnessed the effects of the Spanish flu pandemic, the loss of his young architect, one of the first things he did with the funds from the George Robert White Fund was to establish neighborhood health centers in practically every Boston neighborhood. He went on later to greatly expand the Boston Medical Center, and is known for his public works and infrastructure projects during the Depression, and I would say that's his lasting legacy. The library was the place where where he would meet his constituents, and they would come into the house, be led into the library here. He would talk with him. He would occasionally pick up the telephone and make a phone call. If he could, he would always leave them with a silver dollar. And that was his legacy. You see his campaign poster, the mayor of the poor. While he held a number of public offices, he considered the office of mayor to be the most significant one that he held.
We mentioned earlier that there were 2 maids that would work in the home and would live in the upstairs residence. We had the pleasure of meeting actually the last 2 of the maids. The history of them was that as he occupied this house, he would invite young women from Ireland over to give them an opportunity to get ahead in life, to have a little bit of money, to save something, and to send something back home. And so there was a succession of young women that would come into this country. The last 2 were able to come back to the house. Both of them were in their 80s separately, but they came back to the house and could tell such wonderful stories about how the governor, as both of them called him, would regale them with laughter and would always be generous to everybody who came to that door. Virtually no one came to the door and left empty-handed. And that was his really largesse in life.
Well, thank you for that, Carol and John. I hope everybody enjoyed the tour, and take a few minutes if you have any questions to pop them into the Q&A. We have some great questions that got submitted while we were watching. The first one I will address to Carol, I think. Someone was wondering where the Curley family was living prior to the construction of this home.
I believe they were living in Roxbury. I'm not exactly certain the address, but I'm pretty sure that it was originally in Roxbury. He had, you know, the first few years of his marriage with, I think he had 3 or 4 children by the time they moved to this house. And then others were born in the house.
Great. We have lots of questions pouring in. I'll try to stay on top of them. While we have you, Carol, someone is wondering what is on the 3rd floor.
Those are additional bedrooms. Under the Ovalate father's occupancy, they put the sort of gable end of the house, which would be directly over the master bedroom. They made that into a chapel, which was kind of, you know, significant as it was the Catholic order of missionary priests. So that was their chapel within the home.
Great. John, you might know the answer to this, or maybe Karen does. To what extent was Mayor Curley a champion of Boston's parks and open spaces?
Well, I know that he was instrumental in doing an initial survey of the historic places of Boston, which subsequently is represented by the Boston Landmarks Commission now. But that was an early interest of his, was in the historical places associated with Boston.
I don't know if I had a lot of specifics to add to that, except that I have walked by many structures that were built during the 30s and the WP era, like during the time that Curley would have been involved with investments. And his name is often listed on them. So I know, you know, when you support public works in that period in this country, it means that you are often building roads, but you're often also building parks. So I can't specifically name certain parks, but also the fact that he thought it was so important to have the home on the Jamaica Way across from Olmsted's Park. You know, it says that he definitely cared about open space. The stories that Mr. Dennis tells about, you know, running out of the house to go fishing and you know, ice skating on the pond tells us that, you know, Curley definitely had a real love for open space. And the emerald necklace would have been around for, you know, 40 years already at that point when the house was built.
Great. We have more questions. Maybe I'll couple these, John, you might know. Where did Curley get his money? Everyone wants to know. It's a beautiful home. And a different question, was Curley ever convicted of any crimes? And I'm being provocative by putting those together, I realize.
Well, he wasn't called the Rascal King for nothing. And he was, in fact, convicted twice that I know of. The first time was for taking a civil service exam for a constituent of his. He was an alderman at the time, and he was reelected while he was serving his jail sentence in the Charles Street Jail. So despite the fact that he was convicted, he was still quite popular. The second instance, again, Curley ran 33 campaigns. He had no shortage of political enemies in the Boston area, but he was convicted of mail fraud, I believe it was, and sentenced to prison in Danbury, Connecticut. President Truman subsequently commuted his sentence to several months, and he returned to Boston. He was actually sentenced to prison while he was the mayor of Boston, and but his sentence was commuted. And I'm sorry, what was the third? Oh, where did he get his money?
His money, yeah.
Well, it is a lovely house, as we discussed. A lot of pieces of it were purchased probably at a great discount, owing to the fact that the Rogers house was being demolished. I would imagine that Curley got some very good bids on the work of the house from contractors in the Boston area. he always maintained that he had some investments and that contributed to his being able to construct the house. That's all we know.
Wish we had his investment advisors today. Carol, lots of questions pouring in about a few interior elements. There's a question whether the house has an elevator.
House what?
Hmm?
Oh, an elevator, no.
No elevator that we know of. We have not spotted one. Are the doors we're seeing in the rooms actual wood grain, or is it faux effect? And I'm here, I can go over and knock on one of these. It looked pretty real to me.
All of the doors are real, and almost all of the doors are from the original Henry Rogers estate in Fairhaven. They're solid, they're impenetrable. And they're all heavy mahogany.
Great. We have an update in the Q&A from one of our viewers that they lived on Northampton Street in Roxbury. So I'm going to crowdsource some of these. I think this is fantastic.
One of our participants mentioned something that we should perhaps speak of also. We talk about Mr. Dennis as is Richard Dennis. There were two stepsons that Gertrude brought with her to the marriage, George and Richard. We tend to focus more on Richard only because he survived longer and was a very active participant. But it was two little boys who came to the house in 1936.
Someone is wondering, and I've never heard this, Carol, maybe you have, whether it's true that Rose Kennedy was born in this home, in this house.
No, she was not.
Okay, myths busted. I can take this one. There's a question of why we didn't show the kitchen. That's a very just question. Why would we take folks on a tour of the home and not show the kitchen? And would it be in a future virtual tour? I think we can accommodate that. The truth of it is it was a little tricky footwork to get in and out of that space. It's not incredibly well lit, and we just wanted to make sure we had a very smooth flowing video for you. And because we did move in and then kind of went home relatively quickly after our move, the kitchen is not actually ready for prime time right now, but we will spruce it up and feature it in a future edition of this tour. There's a question from a community member, if someone could talk more about the architect and other work he and his firm did. And specifically also, how much of the house was moved from Fairhaven, such as the marble around the windows. Not sure what marble that is. Perhaps.
The entire dining room came from the Fairhaven estate. The 3-story staircase was from the Fairhaven estate. And the significance of that, beyond the fact that it came from that estate, is that it was the only one at the time, and I'm not sure history moving forward, that is completely structurally unsupported. So that is a circular or a curved stairway that does not have posts coming down from it to support it, as you would find in traditional staircase architecture. And it was considered quite a feat at the time. And the house was built around that, which was really quite interesting. But there are a lot of tile pieces, the fireplaces, window decorations, the pillars coming down the stairs. There's a lot of the decorative portions of the house came from the original estate.
I can speak a bit to Joseph McGinnis. He was a very young architect, graduated from MIT. And I'm just going to look down at my notes here. He went to English high school, and he actually received the Roach Scholarship for design. It's a very prestigious architectural scholarship. And he spent a year abroad studying European buildings before he came back here. He only practiced for about 6 years. As I said, he died in the Spanish flu pandemic. And in addition to the Curley House, he did a number of buildings for the city of Boston, including in addition to Boston City Hospital, some of the infirmary buildings that are on Long Island, in addition to the Boston Public Library, 5 engine houses, 2 schools, one of which was the Michelangelo School in the North End. He also designed a number of Catholic churches in East Boston and Cambridge.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Switching gears a little bit to now that the Conservancy is the tenant of the Curley House, one of the neighbors is asking what took so long in the Conservancy to move into the Curley House? When did the discussions about the move begin? Karen, you could regale us in as much detail as you want. It was a long journey for sure.
Well, the house had not been actively used in quite some time. So when we were super excited to have the opportunity to use the house, and we worked really closely with the White Fund and reviewed a lot of aspects of the house. We learned that the house was zoned residential. It wasn't zoned in accordance for an office, a small office, but an office use. So we went through the appropriate steps to make sure that our use of the house would work. And we went to the zoning board where Mr. Dennis would have been was president in the past. It was kind of amazing. There was a standing ovation. We were there. I've never seen something like that happen. And everybody was really happy about the fact that we'd be able to use the house and allow the public to use it, to view it more regularly. And also there was no internet, there was no cable, there were none of those kinds of things that we need for this program tonight. So that did take some time. And so there were those kinds of things, other kind of repairs that were needed to the electrical system and other things like that. But eventually it did all come together. You also notice there's some exit signs. We had to make sure that all the appropriate ADA compliant things were done on the first floor, to make sure that anyone can be in the house, and also provide appropriate exit, in the case we do have smaller or larger events, to make sure everyone's safe. So there was just some of that. So that did take some time, and we did move in, I believe end of February, beginning of March. And then unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, we, because of COVID, we all started working more remotely, and we do go in and out of the house, and you might see us picking up signs and other, tools and cleanup tools as we go in and out of the house. But that did take some time, and we do look forward to welcoming more of you into the house in the future, when we can welcome you back. And
Just to pick up,
sorry,
Karen, just to pick up on your comment about having to get the house rezoned, Dick Dennis was chairman of the Boston Zoning Board of Appeal for over 30 years. That was the reason for the round of applause. I believe that was the only time he ever went back after he retired from the board to appear before the board. So that was something. Interestingly enough, he took his uncle's place on the Zoning Board of Appeal, his mother's brother, whose name was Casey. And if you go back in the Inspectional Services Department files, you'll find zoning variances signed by either Richard Dennis or his uncle that date back 60 years.
Right. We thought it was we thought it was really important. We wanted to make sure we did right by the house, and we actually dropped off letters to all the neighbors that were within right around the house, so they would know what was going on, because a lot of times when those kinds of notices go out, they're kind of confusing. Someone trying to put in a McDonald's, what's going on? So we were really happy that I spoke with many of the neighbors personally, and they were very supportive of us using the house. We wanted to, there's a lot of things that we want to do right by the house, including making sure the sidewalks are cleared, making sure those kinds of things are taken care of. And we do hope to be able to do more to improve the exterior. I am happy to report that the city's White Fund actually has done a lot of work to inspect the condition of the roof and the exterior, and actually is planning to do some restoration work there. So it seems like the city is I think, very interested in doing that thoughtfully. So I'm very, very pleased at how many people are really taking a deep interest in the house.
We have a question from someone who's actually watching outside the area and doesn't have all the history of the emerald necklace, of what the emerald necklace is, which is great. I'm glad this tour has reached farther. Karen, do you want to do a quick summary? And we'll send information on our website as well through the chat.
Yeah, maybe. So in the chat, we'll put a link to our website. But the emerald necklace is Boston's primary park system. It stretches from downtown, from the Boston Public Garden up Commonwealth Avenue, and then from Charles Gate to Franklin Park. And the section from Charles Gate to Franklin Park was built in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s by Frederick Law Olmsted, who many people might have known by a small project he did in New York called Central Park. But this project was the project that he said was the most important. No work should come before the Boston work. That was his first project. I like to say that the emerald necklace is where he went pro. And this is where he started his real design ethos of the curvilinear park that was based on the shapes of nature really shows. And the emerald necklace is a 1,100 acre park that has the muddy river that runs through it, and it is a defining characteristic of Boston. Many might think it's natural, but it was constructed and it was the first piece of green infrastructure in the United States. And we're really honored to be a nonprofit that works to support our public partners, and support the public in making the best use and improvements of the necklace that we can.
Awesome. We have time. We're keeping an eye on the time. We have time for a couple more questions. There's certainly a lot of interest in renting the house or attending events at the house. So there are questions about whether the house can be rented for nonprofits or functions, and whether Boston residents can visit the house, or we're going to have in-person events.
Would you like me to respond to that?
Karen.
So we just moved in March. We wanted to make sure we knew all the light switches are and everything before we started to do things like that. And then for obvious reasons, we haven't had public events. I do think we're going to try and have, a certain number of tours each year, depending on the interest. And I hope that John or Carol or other people might be available to assist with those, or we could play people this video, or something like that. We could potentially provide the house for events. We want to be thoughtful because we have a lot of neighbors, and we know that we want to make sure that we do that thoughtfully. So we definitely will have meetings, and we have had a few meetings before we had to stop so actively using the house, because the Emerald Necklace Conservancy works with friends groups up and down the Emerald Necklace. We regularly meet about opportunities to improve the park in terms of access or restoration or our youth programs. So we have a lot of people coming and going. It's really wonderful to have all of those spaces for meetings. If you see our visitor center, you will realize we have a lot more space now. We're really thankful, including a basement, which is not tour worthy, but provides excellent garbage bag storage and other tools, which we're very excited about.
That's for the real behind the scenes tour. Just a couple more questions. Someone is writing in, do we know the names of the two women Carol mentioned who had been maids in the home? My mother-in-law worked there for a time before she was married. I wonder if she was one of the women you mentioned. Her name when she worked there was Agnes Kelly. Her married name was Woolley.
No, I met Helen O'Neill, or Helen McDonough rather, Helen McDonough. And my mind is escaping the other woman's name. But that was not the name of the individual. They were the last two. And Helen actually didn't go back to Ireland. She stayed in the States, and actually she went with the Curleys. When they left the house in 1956, she continued to be their maid in Pond Circle for a couple of years. And she was living in West Roxbury and had started a family of her own at that point. But she stayed in the United States. The other woman came back from Ireland just the one time, and probably maybe 2000, 2001. She was in her 80s at the time.
Thank you. We are compiling everybody that's putting anecdotes or stories in the chat or in the Q&A. We are going to be saving all this information, incorporating it in future tours and reaching out to you if we have more questions. So we really appreciate the time you're taking to share your personal histories with us. One more question. I think a lot of folks might like to know, where are the Curley archives for study? John, do you know?
Well, I mentioned that the scrapbooks that he kept were donated to Holy Cross. So they have a number of books and memorabilia from the Curley years that I'm not sure they're open to the public, but they're open for scholarly research.
The Boston Public Library also is a treasure trove of pictures of pictures and clippings from newspapers, parts of his speeches. The Mayor Curley was an interesting individual that he never finished high school. I think he went to the 8th grade, but I may be mistaken on that. But he is an excellent orator. He used some very flowing language, and when he would write letters, they were beautifully written. And he was someone who spent much of his youth growing, when he wasn't working, at the Boston Public Library, reading and researching and learning. So even though he hadn't been educated in a formal sense through the high school or college years, his academic prowess was the equivalent to anyone who had been.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carol. I think that's all the time we have for your wonderful questions. If there are some that we didn't get to in the live Q&A, we'll be happy to follow up with you offline with more information. I know that at the beginning, as people were logging on, we did a quick poll, and I think Jamie would like to share it with folks for another couple seconds for those who didn't have a chance to answer where they're joining us from and how they heard about the event. That would be great to do for half a minute. And I just wanted to say thank you again to Carol and John for taking us on this wonderful tour. To all the neighbors, many of you joined us tonight for kind of cheering us on and waiting and shepherding our journey from our former administrative offices. Someone asked where the offices used to be located. They were in the Shattuck Visitor Center at 125 the Fenway, near the MFA. And we still have the visitor center. It is unfortunately closed due to COVID right now, but certainly we look forward to welcoming folks there for a more fleshed out visitor experience as opposed to an office space. So we look forward, that's another thing we look forward to doing after the pandemic. And thank you to all of you who chose to spend an hour of this beautiful spring evening with us and looking into the Curley House. If you still have energy to keep going with the Emerald Necklace and you are actually local, we do invite you to check out Lights in the Necklace on our website. It's the program of light installation along 8 bridges in the Emerald Necklace at 6 different locations. It is on view every night, dusk until 9 p.m. through March 31st, end of March. So I'm looking out the window, probably within the next 15 minutes to half an hour, those lights are going to start looking very green. And we'll put a link to that in the chat. And to learn more about the Conservancy and our work, please visit us at www.emeraldnecklace.org. Events and programs like this one can be found on our event calendar, and we'll be continuing to populate the chat with links. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this program, if you enjoy the parks on a daily basis, if you have a special memory connected with the Emerald Necklace and would like to see more of this kind of programming, please consider making a donation to the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. You can do that at emeraldnecklace.org/donate. Thank you again so much. We look forward to welcoming you to future virtual tours and of course, live at the Curley House, hopefully sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.